What are you making?
I'm mixing up a stew to give corporate a different view. Have a taste. Welcome to the Corporate Kitchen. I'm your host, Tiger, and today on the menu is mentorship. My opinion, this is one of those topics that make or break your career because this is one of those who you know versus what you know mindset type things. There are 3 levels to workplace advocates, tier 1 being coaches, tier 2 being mentors, tier 3 being sponsors. In the simplest form, coaches talk to you, mentors talk with you, and sponsors talk about you. We will cover coaches and sponsors in another episode. Today is about mentors, those talking with you. So, according to the Merriam-Webster, the definition of mentorship is the influence, guidance, or direction given by a mentor. Roll that dough flatter to see what a mentor is, and you get the following. 1. A friend of Odysseus entrusted with the education of Odysseus' son, Telemachus. Wait, what? Pause for a minute. In Homer's Odyssey, Trojan War, Telemachus, helping and assisting. Oh, wow, okay. Wait, okay, the Greek mythology explains this really well. I'm surprised it's the first thing that shows up in the dictionary, but yeah, Athena was in the guise of mentor for Telemachus. Okay, that makes sense. Number 2 is a trusted counselor or guide, and 3 is a tutor or a coach. For this episode, we're really looking at definition 2, a trusted counselor or guide. The first key takeaway that we want to dive into with this is it's a type of relationship. Mentorship is a type of relationship. It requires both parties to be present and contribute. Will you hear that ship at the end, right? For any of my Vampire Diaries listeners out there, this is Stelena versus Delena. I'm a Stelena fan, by the way. It's a type of relationship. And it's very synonymous to mashed potatoes and gravy, right? There's 2 pieces. Individually, they are something, right? Mashed potatoes is one thing, gravy is another. But you put them together for the relationship that they make as mashed potatoes and gravy. Ironically, there is a lot more focus on the mashed potatoes normally than there is the gravy. Same thing with the mentorship relationship. There's usually a lot more focus on the mentor than there is on the mentee. For good reason too, right? If we think about mashed potatoes, there's many ways to make them, and people tend to do different customizations based on their taste and their style, right? Me specifically, I'm lactose intolerant. Like I wouldn't say severely, but mildly. Therefore, I can't use as much heavy cream and dairy like butter as other people would. There are people that mash them and then whisk them afterwards. There are some people that like them clumpy. So many different ways to make mashed potatoes. That is just like your mentors. They come in many different forms, many different leadership styles, and many different ways that they interact in a mentorship relationship. That means you as a mentee approaching a mentorship relationship have the ability to choose your style of mashed potatoes. If you're someone like me and you're mildly to severely lactose intolerant, don't choose the high dairy product, right? What does this mean in the corporate world? This means that someone could be a great mentor. They could come recommended and people can say high things about them, but there's something about them that when you attempt to garner a relationship with them, it doesn't mesh. And that's okay, right? Everyone's not going to be the flavor for everyone else. What works for me may not necessarily work for you. It's a relationship. All relationships don't work. And you do have to understand that and why we're stressing that it's a relationship, right? You have to put in the work to figure out, hey, does this actually work? Is this something that I desire to be into? You as the mentee, closer to the gravy, right? When you're acting in the guise of the mentee, you are the secondary piece to the relationship normally, but just as important, good gravy is like delicious, man. Like people who can make that from scratch, especially around Thanksgiving, when people use like the gizzards and the inside of the turkey to make the gravy, comes out so good. If you really, really focus on yourself, you could come to the table just as great as the mashed potatoes and put that together into a relationship and it can prosper, right? So remember, it is a relationship. It requires both parties to be present and contribute. You have your end in the form of a mentee to also still contribute into that conversation, into that relationship. Usually in these type of relationships, though, we see a labor grade difference between the parties that influence the desire to initiate this type of relationship, right? If you are newer to the company or of a lower labor grade, you might seek a higher labor grade. If you are already an executive, you could still seek someone higher, even CEOs, right? If you're CEO of a company, you think, oh, that is the highest position that there is. Eh, eh. Rarely the highest position is board of directors and the shareholders in these public companies. So, as a chief executive officer, you can have a mentor that's board of directors somewhere else or is a CEO at another company as a peer. When we approach these relationships, don't always point to the labor grade as the reasoning to initiate it. I know that's really popular, especially when you're early in your career and you're trying to increase your network because, again, as we started this episode, it's not what you know normally, it's who you know, right? It's okay to have these relationships vertically and horizontally. What does that mean? Vertically up the labor grade scale, you're a lower labor grade than as a mentee of your mentor, but also horizontally, right? You could be the same labor grade as the person you're considering a mentor, and that's okay. That is as important as the vertical mentorship. Why? If you have the ambition to move up in the corporate ladder, by the time you reach your goal, let's call it, for example, senior vice president. By the time you reach that goal, the person that was holding that position would be long gone if you're currently at a lower labor grade. Therefore, the people that will be supporting you when you are in that senior vice president position you currently work with, they're your peers. It is as important to make sure you have great relationships and mentorships with them as you do with the senior vice president. The advisement that you can get from them early on is going to pay dividends to the relationship when you need to pull on them as senior vice president. So make those mentorship relationships vertically and horizontally. And we talked a lot about mentorships on the format of you being the mentee and someone else being the mentor. The reverse is also true, and you should be doing both at all times. You should never walk into corporate and say, I need a mentor, but I'm not going to mentor anyone. And it's more than just a pay it forward type of thing, right? I'm going to tell you should do it because you should pay it forward. But there's more to it than that. The second takeaway for this podcast episode is what we're going to call reverse mentoring, and it's real. Reverse mentoring is real. It's a relationship in which the mentee is giving more than the mentor. What does the giving mean, right? Let's go back to a traditional relationship, especially with the mashed potatoes and gravy. Traditional relationship, we focus so much on the mashed potatoes. We focus so much on the mentor. We're doing vertical mentoring, and we're trying to get as much advisement as possible from this executive or from this manager. Regardless, they're a higher labor grade than us. The assumption is they know better. Their leadership style is a lot more reinforced because they have more tenure than us, and that they're better in terms of their career trajectory because they have more experience, right? And we tend to focus a little too much on that, forgetting that when you reach a certain tenure, you lose sight a little bit on the past for good reason, right? If you were starting your career in the 1980s. It is now 2025. Everything that happened in the 80s and 90s, you could remember, but it shouldn't still hold as much relevancy, right? If you are in engineering, even in, let's say, 2000s, the code, the engineering, the information technology infrastructure that we have today is light years ahead of what was available in the year 2000. Therefore, let's say you hit executive in the year 2000. Now it's 2025. The people with the most information are actually going to be the younger crowd coming in doing all that work. You as the executive could learn a lot from that younger crowd. And this is where that reverse mentoring comes in, where it's, hey, I need a relationship where I'm the mentee and I can learn from everyone else, right? I did that job 20 years ago. I'm a little out of touch with how things currently are. How can I seek help? That's when that reverse mentoring comes in, because you don't have to necessarily seek out, I need to be the mentee to a younger person to mentor me. You can take that same, I'm the mentor as an executive and you're the mentee as the younger person in the vertical relationship, and switch roles. It doesn't have to always be one-sided. I think in the trailer, I talked about executives who talk so much but don't want to listen to anything. If you get in that type of relationship where the person you classify as a mentor is doing all the talking, you don't have a chance to articulate yourself, you may not be in a relationship that is able to do reverse mentoring. I'm not going to tell you that's not okay. I'm just going to tell you that it may not be able to do that, right? So if you just want great mashed potatoes, have your mashed potatoes. The ability to switch up and say, well, what about the gravy? How good is that gravy? Can that gravy provide something to me more than the McCormick's packet? And in those instances that's true, that reverse mentoring kicks in, and you now become the mentor advising who you consider the mentor in a mentee set now, right? So let's break that down one more time, just in case that got confusing. Traditional, vertical, or even horizontal mentorship relationships. There is a mentor and a mentee. That mentor is someone that's usually doing more of the talking originally, and who is considered the more tenured or the smarter, or whatever reasoning you have for identifying this person as someone you believe can help advocate for your career and you can talk with for your career, right? Reminder, this is the person you talk with. What does that mean? It means the conversation should be a conversation, or a conversation requires two people. Two people should be talking. If one person is just giving dialogue to you, it's not really a conversation. This podcast, for example, it's not really a conversation because I'm just talking to you. I can't hear you talk back to me, which is why I'm going to say, talk to me back on social media. Go on the Instagram page at the Corp Kitchen and talk back to me. Let me know how things are. Let me know how things are with your mentor relationships, right? Are they good? Are they bad? Are you in a vertical one or a horizontal one? But standard mentor relationships should be conversations. Both people should be contributing. And even if from a sense of, I'm not doing a lot of the talking because I'm doing learning, that feedback loop counts as your contribution, where it's like, hey, I understand, but I'm looking for this, or hey, thanks a lot for that. Can we continue having conversations because I really want to learn about X, Y, and Z? You have to contribute something into the relationship, even if you're not going to interject as much in the verbal communication. You got to be doing something. Take that, and that would be your standard mentor relationship. Switch the roles with those two exact people within the same relationship sometimes, and the mentee provides the advice, the guidance, the same way that your mentor would. You're now doing it. And it shouldn't really come as a surprise that this happens, right? If you listen to what I said earlier, these people who are executives have been in their roles for so long. I remember talking to a friend about how we are in our fourth role now, fourth department. What we did in that first department, we still remember, but we shouldn't consider ourselves the subject matter experts on. We shouldn't consider ourselves as the resident active experts to get advice on it from. Can I give you advice on that department? Absolutely. Could I tell you about how my experience was? Yes. Is it the latest and greatest? No. And I know some people may raise their hand and say, some things never change. Correct. I would agree with that. Some industries are like very, very slow at changing, like very slow. It takes, a second ice age before they're going to change their processes. Got it. Understood. But if we're going to talk about how things are today, we got to go with the people that are actively the SMEs in there who are going through the day by day. Use them as the best mentor for that area and use that reverse mentoring to gain more insight from them, right? They will be able to provide everything that is currently happening. And then you could hear it and say, oh, here are the differences from when I was in that group, or wow, that group is the exact same. So everything that I've done in that group still happens today. That was 20 years ago. We're here today. We didn't really learn a lot, right? And start to close that gap. When you are the mentee and you're a lower labor grade and you have a mentor of a higher labor grade, don't rush into reverse mentoring, right? I would say that remember why you initiated the mentorship in the first place. Why was the entire relationship initiated? And it's usually in this aspect of a different labor grade, it's usually because you're seeking something. Make sure you're still addressing that, right? Make sure that you're pursuing that. When the opportunity for reverse mentoring presents itself, then you can do it. Is the McCormick's gravy packet the best gravy that you can have? No. Does it do the job? Yes. And that's the approach that you have to take. Are you doing your job? Are you contributing, doing your part? And I'm going to tell you something that may be an unpopular opinion here. Don't forget about your tenured workforce. When I say tenured, I purely mean the people that have been there longer than you've been alive. And there are people at your company that are like that. I might have some listeners that's like, whoa, I'm in my 60s. I don't know about that. Well, yeah, fair. Okay. But if you're listening to this podcast and you're in your 60s, I thank you. I'm impressed. Thank you for listening. I wouldn't think you'd be interested, but I appreciate you. Everyone else, though, 40 years. Oh, there have been people in the company 40 years. 50, hit or miss, but it's not totally abnormal to see someone that's been in the company 50 years, and they definitely get celebrated for those achievements. If you need a baseline, you can say tenured is anyone with more than 20 years of experience. Those are the people that you want to make sure you consider in your mentorships. Don't overlook them. If you come in hot and you're like, I just want to look at leadership, that's a choice. Understood. My personal opinion is also offer yourself as a mentee to those that have been there. They have been through so much history. If the company is old enough, you're not in a startup, you're in a large corporate Fortune 500 company that's been around for at least 50 years, there is plenty of history in that company. What do we say about history? Those who don't know it are doomed to repeat it, right? You can do your best work understanding your company's history, understanding your function's history, and understanding where we're trying to go based off history, right? If when we're talking about all these public companies, they just want to increase shareholder value. Most of the time, the projects that are deemed important to increase shareholder value are not new. They've been done. Ooh, I have a great idea for improving the organization. I have this continuous improvement project. Go ask one of your tenured employees. Go ask a peer that's been there a while and just ask, has this been done before? 9 times out of 10, they're going to say yes. And they're going to explain to you how many times it's been done, right? It's not, yes, this has been done once. It's probably, yes, this has been done 3 or 4 times. Every time it failed. This is why it failed. Get that advisement from those older, and when I say older, I mean aging like fine wine. You might be gray, but I'm sure you're aging like fine wine. People who just know better. They know better. And that is going to take me to the third takeaway in all of this. I talked in depth about human to human mentorships. When we think of any mentorship, we think person to person. What's nice about where we are now post-pandemic is the ability to kind of open up the communication channels. Before, a lot of these conversations were had in person, whether at the golf course or in office, right? Sometimes it happens at office, right? Then it's a quick lunch or something. Now with the corporate America infrastructure embracing all the telecommunications, we now have the embedded infrastructure to make sure that you can continue to meet with mentors from all over the world, not just the ones living within the continental United States, but also abroad, whether they're expatting or whether they just decide to pack up and move. You can connect with anyone today. But that's human to human. The third takeaway for this episode is that I really, really, really want you to remember the best mentor that you could have in your life, the best, is not a human. It's a book. A book is your best mentor. If you look at the Merriam-Webster, definition 2 that we're using for mentor read, a trusted counselor or guide. If you look in the dictionary at guide, it is identified as a person or something that provides a person, meaning a guide doesn't have to be human. If it's something that provides a person, book provides you with something, right? The book is that something. And why it's so important is PSA, we're going to do it right now, public service announcement. Reading is important. Reading is fundamental. Reading is fundamental. I messed up saying that, so let me clarify that and make sure I say it correctly. Reading is fundamental. If you are in a job that requires you to do 0 reading, let me know on Instagram. I am very curious if there is any role out there where you have to do 0 reading. I'm pretty sure I can confidently say 100% of roles require you to do some level of reading. Therefore, if you have to do it, embrace it. Read a book. No, not a TikTok. TikTok is nice. It's funny, when I'm recording this episode, the United States just banned TikTok because the Supreme Court ruling upheld. We're not talking about TikTok. TikTok is great, sure. Social media is great, sure. Let's put the phone down. Read a book. Couple reasons for that, right? The mentors that you talk to, the majority of the traits they possess, they learned. Even if they had some inept level of it, fine. But they strengthen that competency, or they learned it from a book. Oh, they went to a training class and they learned it from a teacher. Okay, that training had books. That trainer probably learned their trait and trade from a book. Books have all the information and knowledge that we need. When we're younger in high school, we have our English classes and social studies that are really pushing to read, know your history, know your literature. Some people may have embraced it. Some people say reading's not for me. I got it. I totally understand where you're coming from. I was one of those people that, from a social study standpoint, I did like it. But from a literature standpoint, if the book didn't interest me, I didn't really care for it. And I wasn't really as enthused. I didn't have the enthusiasm to read those books that were just honestly boring to me. But we're adults now. We are adults now. If you want to perform, if you want to do better, you have the choice to do that. And you also now have the choice in the knowledge and literature that you want to provide yourself. I will 1000% recommend reading a book. I started a New Year's resolution where I wanted to read one book a month, and I'm on track to do that for this month and next month. I implore you to do something similar. Read, right? If you think about the mashed potatoes and gravy, how did you learn how to make mashed potatoes and gravy? If you're using the McCormick brown gravy packet, there are instructions on there that I'm pretty sure you read how to do. Because if you mess that up, it's not bueno, right? It's not good. Mashed potatoes. How did you learn to make mashed potatoes? Did you follow someone's recipe? When you saw mashed potatoes made a different way, did you look up a different recipe and see how to make it? If you did, you were reading. You used a book to provide, or, the internet. We're just using a book to encompass the reading aspect, whether you used Google searching or you used a magazine, whatever. But you read to give yourself knowledge and power and advisement. And guess what? There is no vertical or horizontal type relationship worries in that relationship. It's just you and a book. The bonus, you do it at your own pace. When you do person to person, you have to deal with schedule conflicts. You have to deal with availability. You have to deal with whether it's going to be in person or virtual, right? A lot of different variables are at it. When you use a book, it's a book. I'm going to give this PSA one more time. Read a book. Highly recommend just reading books to gain all the information that you want to know. The creation of this podcast, as well as the episodes and the content, how I'm editing it, a lot of it came from reading, right? I read a lot of different literatures in order to understand, how do I create a podcast? How do I edit a podcast? How do I launch it? All of that is important to gain advisement from human and non-human factors. The best, and if you want to think about it this way, the best way to think about this is your favorite celebrity probably has written a book that was a bestseller. That's like an old adage. It's almost annoying at this point, right? Where, this person is a 5-time New York Times best-selling author, and it's like, what do they know about writing? But if you sit down and think about it, everything they would have told you, person to person, they wrote down. Therefore, especially if you're an introvert, don't even worry about talking to them. Just go straight into the book. Buy the book, read the book at your own time, at your own pace, and bam, now you have that knowledge. And knowledge is power. As much as we talk about, it's not what you know, it's who you know, right? You have to use what you know to leverage, to identify who to know, right? We talk about this on a versus level. What versus who? It's really what leads to who. You use what you know and what you learn to identify who you need to influence, who do you need to work with, who do you need to make sure they are held accountable to do the job that they need to do. Use that knowledge to get you where you want to be. And read a book. Before we wrap up, I do want to go back to something that I mentioned earlier and kind of footstep a point here. The COVID-19 pandemic kind of changed the way that we work. In the year 2025, it seems like there is a industry-wide call to action to revert back to how things were pre-COVID-19. For those of you that worked before the pandemic, you understand how important it was to meet people in person and the amount of interactions that we had in person. Those of you who started working after the pandemic and are dealing with the full integration of telecommunications in order to ensure that there is collaboration, and now the revert back to in-office, use that as an opportunity. The in-person to in-person meeting for mentorships, whether it's in office or not, that person-to-person interface will do you a lot better than virtual. If you are limited to virtual, highly recommend turning cameras on to see the person that you're talking to kind of make that, hey, now I have a face to a name type connection. The more, it's a relationship, right? The more you put into it, the more quote unquote reward you can get out of it. If you aren't interested in putting the effort to foster that relationship, it's not going to grow. You want to make mashed potatoes, but you're not going to wait for them to finish boiling, right? Or you don't want to use any type of liquid to help after they're done boiling. Like, are you really trying to foster it, right? You as the gravy, you don't want to use a McCormick's packet. You just want to use a great value packet or something cheaper. Do better. Really put yourself in a position to be successful by being present and contributing to those type of relationships. The opportunity to meet those people in person by leveraging a potential return to office movement is in your hands. Take advantage of that, right? If you have to be back in office, take advantage of the ability to now talk to these people who you normally would only talk to on the phone or through Skype or Teams, to now see them in person. You will provide a lot more benefit just by that person-to-person interaction than you could virtually. On the flip side of being a mentor, regardless of what stage you are in your career, remember the telecommunications only make it easier. It only makes it easier. There's really no excuse. If you have the ambition to continue moving, and I said moving, doesn't matter if it's up, it doesn't matter if it's across, but if you want to move on from the space that you're in now, you're going to need help to do it. We, as Americans, like to talk a lot about how the billionaires continue getting tax cuts and how the wealth of the billionaires increase. They're not doing that by themselves. They're the billionaires. They control so much, but they're not doing it by themselves. Therefore, you don't do that by yourself. Don't try to reach your goals by yourself. Try to find some mentors, foster those relationships to help get you where you want to be. And it doesn't matter if it's up, across, out of the company, in the company you are in or you want to be in. Foster those relationships, help them grow, make them good. And it takes time. It takes time. When we do our mashed potatoes, we can't make that in 10 minutes. We can't make them good in 10 minutes. Let me back up. We can't make them good in 10 minutes. If you got one of those microwavable packs or the quick grits type, like, we don't want that. I'm sorry. It makes mashed potatoes, but I want you to have something a lot more value, something really good. So it takes a minute to foster those types of relationships. Invest in them early, and you'll do great. Remember 3 things from today. Number 1, it's a type of relationship. It is a relationship. Ghost Elena. 2, reverse mentoring is real. If you ever enter a mentorship as a mentee, you might see yourself as the mentor sometimes. 3, a book is your best mentor. Remember those 3 things with your mentorships, and it should help you get that much closer to reaching the goals that you have in life. And with that, we'll turn off this stove, take off the thinking apron, and let's just say the dishes will get done later. This topic wasn't a big mess, but if we learned something today, then we know there's a little cleaning up to do. I do want to talk this topic more, maybe trade stories about this soon, like this Thursday soon. I hope to see you there. Thanks for being in the corporate kitchen today. I'm your host, Tiger. Until next time.